It's Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, so you know what that means. It's time for another episode of #Event Icons, presented by Endless Events, the show where you get to ask the icons of the events industry anything. Use the question panel on the webinar to submit your questions, or you can hop on Twitter. Submit your questions with #Event Icons. We'll be answering your questions live during the entire show. Before we get started, the more people we have watching, the better conversation we can have. So please help share #Event Icons on Twitter and Facebook. Just tell your friends to watch at www.event-icons.com. Now, without any further delay, this is #Event Icons.
Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Event Icons, where we bring you the icons of the event industry. And today we are definitely being joined by two of the icons of the event industry. I've had an opportunity to share dinner with these two fine gentlemen, and let me tell you, the conversation was some of the best that I've had in my life. So wonderful, wonderful to be joined today by Hans Etman, who is a moderator for over 10 years and co-owns an international booking agency for moderators. Hello, Hans. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Brent. Thanks for having me.
And we're being joined by Elling Hamso, a senior executive in the oil and gas industry who found his passion for organizing events and turned to be a leading expert in Europe and the ROI methodology. That's how I originally met you, Elling, was through your methodology and work with ROI, helping plan effective events. So thank you for joining us, Elling.
My pleasure.
And if you haven't figured out from listening to those bios or the title of the episode, we are going to be talking about panels and moderators today. And this is a fantastic topic that really digs into how our meetings and events work and how they are facilitated and how do we keep them moving along? How do we make sure we're getting that ROI out of it? And how do we really make sure that we're engaging in those audiences? We talk about audience engagement a lot on this show. And so let's get right into it, gentlemen. We always ask the same two questions. Hans, you know this from being on the show before. Yeah. We ask the same two questions of our guests every time, so you can give the abbreviated answer if folks want to go back and listen to the episode that Hans was on, which, as I recall, was actually named one of our favorite episodes of the year on green meetings. If you go back to listen to that episode, you can find out more. But in brief, Hans, what got you into the events industry? And if you weren't in the events industry, what would you be doing instead?
Okay, those two questions, very briefly. I started as a speaker, and after being in a few national conferences on soil, because I was in the environmental business, they asked me as a moderator, and I found that much nicer, so I skipped the speaking, I skipped the environmental business, which wasn't my business at all, actually. And I started moderating over 10 years ago now, and I'm still doing that as of today.
Very good. And if you weren't doing that, what would you be doing?
I would probably be unhappy in the environmental business.
Still doing that. Sorry. Okay. All right. All right. And then Elling, what got you into the events industry? And if you weren't doing that, what would you be doing instead?
Well, it was by pure chance, like most things in life, I guess. Someone asked me to help organize an industry conference when I was in the oil and gas industry. And I took more interest in just turning up as a speaker and ended up helping organizing the conference for the next 10 years. So I sort of just happened to fall into to the organizer role. If I wasn't doing that, well, then I'd probably be in oil and gas construction. But if I could have a free choice, I think probably if I was going to start again, I would be a social anthropologist. I'd like to understand and study generations and how they're different. I did some little bit of research and some speaking on the Facebook generation and how we deal with them at the events. And I found that was absolutely fascinating.
Could still be very useful, Elling, because if you know your audience, you make better meetings.
Absolutely, and they're not like us oldies, you know, in more ways than I really like to find out.
There's a lot of those peripheral industries and disciplines that can definitely impact events. I mean, for myself personally, I've got a core in psychology from college, and theater is the other one. So
Yeah.
so theater and psychology definitely play hugely in our stuff. So yeah, psychology and anthropology and all of those things.
That's interesting. That's interesting, Brad, because when people ask me what would be the ideal subjects to study to become a good event designer, I usually say behavioral psychology and the theater. So that's you.
Very nice, very nice. Well, let's dive into talking more about panels and moderators. And I'd like to ask each of you to kind of describe your dream panel moderator. How do they ask the questions? How often do they speak? If you could kind of create that perfect panel moderator, what would that person look like? Elling?
Well, first of all, I would like to experience that he really, really understands what is it the stakeholders want to get out of this event. He understands what the learning objectives are. He understands what the organizers would like to see participants doing when they walk out the door and they get back into their office, what attitudes they want to change, what information they need to stick with participants, what they want them really to buy into. And I think if the moderator really has a good appreciation of what is this event for, what we're trying to achieve, not just looking at his job as facilitating a discussion, but really understanding the ultimate goal of that discussion. That's for me absolutely a number one. And I find often myself as a moderator and other moderators, during the planning, you easily get involved with the instructional design, making sure that there's time enough for reflection and discussion, and how do you put energy into the room. So to me, a moderator is very much a good moderator, also become a part of the instructional design team. That's a sort of foundation, I think, for good moderation. And then, there are all the other things. The moderator is I think I learned that term from Hans. He's the translator in a way between the speaker and the audience. He makes sure that questions are followed up, that questions are paraphrased if they need be. Sometimes you get a question which isn't clear or isn't even very intelligent, and then you turn it into something which is clear and good. Sometimes the speaker tries to get away with not really answering the question, and the good moderator doesn't let them get away with that. So I think to have a moderator really knows what he's doing, and he's playing an active role, not overdoing it, but playing an active role, making sure there's real good conversation between the audience or the panel and the speakers. That's my tuppence worth.
Yeah. And Hans, how about you? What would be your kind of dream panel moderator?
Well, a panel moderator could be moderating a panel is only one thing a moderator does. And if you use a panel in your conference, it should have a value. The panel should have a value. Not that you just put the people in the panel that have the status to be seen on stage, or the important directors or stakeholders that you want to give some place in your program. And if they couldn't speak, well, let's put them in the panel. The panel should have a use, and you should put the panel or the people in the panel to use to get the goal of your meeting. And a good moderator is, before the meeting even starts, like Elling said, part of the design team. And if you know what the whole meeting is about, then your panel could play an important role to get to the goal of that meeting. So during the moderation of the panel, you should use the panelists to help clarify maybe different angles of the topic of your meeting, or get a nice discussion or a debate, or maybe make the connection between policy and practice, or between the broader perspective and detailed examples. So there are different views, and a good panel should also be should consist of people that do not have the same view or the same angle. if you agree with 3, 4, 5, or 6 people in a panel, it is a totally boring panel. Like I must say, most panels actually are. And a panel, therefore, is one of the most difficult instruments that you can use in your conference. And it's not something that you put in because you don't know anything else to do in that spot in your program. But it's a very difficult piece of programming. And a good moderator should either prevent the panel if it's not useful, or moderate the panel if it's useful, and then moderate it to the goal of the meeting.
So you both mentioned getting that moderator as part of the design process. Now, that's not something I've seen very often. I mean, how often do you feel that that's happening, where you're actually getting moderators involved in that design process?
Well, I can say most of the time in my practice, in my agency, when I rent out a moderator, so to say, all our moderators are in different aspects skilled in meeting design or in interaction design. And what you see is that the more they can help design your meeting, make different interaction forms or formats, you get more interaction with the audience. And like Elling said, it's also a translation from the speaker to the audience, but also back, because if you only send information into your audience, you hardly get anything back. And just think of the moments that you have a Q&A at the end of a presentation and the speaker asks, are there any questions? And nobody has any questions.
But I don't know what it is, but you know, somehow in Holland, in my experience, there has over many years been developing a culture of meetings need to be well moderated. I don't see it in other countries. And I certainly don't see much good moderation elsewhere, unfortunately. And I think it's reflecting on the industry in general. I'm delighted to see in recent years we're focusing much more on designing the learning experiences of meetings. You don't see so many, you know, murder by bullet point type boring meetings. And the professional moderators obviously need to respond to that, but we're very far from there yet. I don't work in the US. You probably do this much better than us, but in my experience, finding good moderators who are part of the instructional design team, which I think they need to be to do their job well, that is not something I find as common.
I can say not much. I mean, speaking from the events that I've worked on the U.S. side, not much. There's been a lot of focus lately on who's on the panels and getting diversity of not only gender but also thought. You know, getting people to mix up who's on the panels. But I can say that I haven't seen a whole lot of focus on who moderates the panels. I can say that the panels that I've been on, when the person who's moderating has taken an active role and reached out to the other panelists in advance and said, okay, this is what I'm thinking of doing. This is how I think it should go. Here's kind of what I'm thinking of the questions. What are the points that you want to get out, you know, and really help shape that. Those have been the best panels that I've been on, you know, when you've got that active participation and that active role from the moderator.
But it's also very much about creating an active interaction between the audience and the panel. And I see many panel debates which are designed to be discussions between the panelists and for the audience to watch that discussion. And then we're back in the same old, you know, mindset of a passive audience listening to experts. So I think a good panel moderator will challenge the audience and will take something the panelists say and then throw that at the audience, and if nobody picks it up, you put your microphone to someone who seems to be nodding and paying attention, or maybe creating a little bit of that, you know, feeling in the audience, I better be sharp here because suddenly the moderator is going to expect me to make a comment or, you know, get a a lively engagement by the audience and making a discussion between the audience and the panelists.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And that's also a dangerous part, because if you just walk out into the audience and put your microphone under somebody's nose, it could create a very unsafe atmosphere, and you don't want that, because you want to have everybody to participate in the meeting. So that's one of the skills that moderators should have. You should feel where you're needed and where not. And you should also feel during the panel discussion if you should intervene or not. So that could be an intervention on stage between the panelists by, for instance, interrupting them and asking another question, or asking a common mistake, in my opinion, is that you see a moderator asking the same question to all the panelists, maybe just to get the discussion started. So what's your view on our topic? And the person next to you, what's your view on our topic? And then 3, 4 times, maybe 6 times. But why not pick up the answer from the first panelist and ask the second for examples of that? And if he agrees, he can just pick up the answer and continue from that point. And if he doesn't agree, he can say so and give another view. So you create more atmosphere of conversation than just answering the questions.
And I'm going to interrupt and just take this opportunity to remind the audience that they can interact with our guests. And if you want to send in questions, you can use, if you're joining us live on Zoom, you can use the Q&A panel found there. Otherwise, you can join by using the hashtag event icons on Twitter, or if you're watching us live on Facebook, you can enter questions in there and they will be fed to us. So please do take advantage. We love it when people watch live, which is why we do the show live. So please do take a moment if you want to interact with us and our guests. I think that's a really great point, Hans, about not doing this. And now we cheat. We use the same 2 questions with every single group of people that we interview, but more because it acts as bookends. So we have, bookend questions that we start and end with for every show to give consistency to the shows. But that's a design choice. But I do like the fact, because I have seen so many of those panels where it is, okay, panelist A, same question, panelist B, same question, C, same question. And it does sometimes feel like a bit of a time waster, that, because again, like what Elling said, a lot of times we've got people that just all agree on the panel. And so it's going to be the same answer given 6 times, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think one of the answers that should be banned is, I agree with the previous speaker. If you say that, you should leave the panel, I think.
I agree with the previous speaker that should be banned.
I think also you see sometimes these, 5, 6, 7 panelist panels, and you realize it's happening because the organizer wants to have some well-known names and use that as a marketing tool, that you can listen to all these top experts. But I find it's, the larger the panel, the more difficult it becomes to really get good interaction. And if I can have 2 or 3, I'm much happier, and I think there's a greater potential for success. And if you have 5 or 6, then it almost becomes impossible to make that engaging, I think. I don't know what Hans experienced.
Yeah, well, I think that's true, because when 6 people are in a panel, there's a chance that one of them, or maybe 2 of them, don't get to say a lot. Maybe they have traveled all the country to get in that panel and say 2 sentences and go back again. Would be a waste of time and a waste of energy. So if you make a panel, if you use a panel, maybe I should say it like this: if you use a panel as an instrument in your program, you want to achieve something with that panel, and maybe you could look for either 3 different angles, maybe a governmental angle and a company angle and a scientific angle, just to give an example. Or you find 2 opposite views and maybe a neutral third. Could be a scientist as well, could be someone in education or someone in policy. So if you create a field of tension between the different views or angles, you get a much more interesting panel. and your panel works better to achieve your goal, which probably is either to research some aspects of the topic of your day, or find a solution to a problem, or put things into practice that you have written down in a policy, for instance.
Unfortunately, what happens a lot, like Elling said, is that you wind up with this, 6 or 7 group panel that's been put together because they're all, very important people, and they, need to be, and they all need to be on the stage for various reasons, whether it's economical or sponsorship or corporate hierarchy. Is there any way that you can still optimize, a group like that where you've only got an hour and you've got 7 incredibly important people that all have to get their piece in?
Yeah. I think if you have 7 people,
this one was yours. I thank you very much. Can you find somebody else to do that? Yeah.
if you have 7 people that should be in a panel and you have an hour, why not make 2 panels of 3 people? If you have an hour, why not do a short panel with 3 people? Have one of the 7 important people give their opinion in between, like a sort of pitch. Have another panel of 3 or 4 people, different people, after that, and maybe have them rounded up with a pitch each. An hour is a lot of time to do in your program, and if you have 7 important views, it's wonderful. If you have just 7 important people, divide them over the hour and give them something to talk about.
But I think also, and in particular, if you have sufficient time, but I have almost like a golden rule, and it doesn't only apply to panels, it applies to anything that happens on stage. Q&A, for example, your speaker or your panelist is a subject matter expert. He or she has had a couple of months to prepare their topic, their presentation. And then someone has the nerve, after they've said their piece, to stand up and say to the audience, well, would anyone now like to stand up with heart pumping on the spur of the moment and ask a really intelligent question in front of your peers? Now that is totally unfair. So I always have a rule with presentations after the speaker's finished his short piece, and I will always give the audience like 5, 7, 10 minutes, talk amongst themselves, and it could be preparing some questions. And I would do the same with a panel. Maybe before the panel goes on stage and the topic is clear, or someone, the moderator or one of the panelists or 2 of the panelists, introduces a subject matter, some content, and then say to the audience, now take 6 or 7 minutes, just group together in little groups and prepare a question. And that gives them a chance not only to think about questions, they discuss them amongst themselves, so the questions that come out of it are probably, more relevant. And it gives people confidence to stand up and ask that question because they've already checked it out in a safe environment. So if you can do that kind of design, I think it gives you better audience engagement and gives you a better dialogue with the panel.
Very good. People stay awake. People have the time to reflect on the topic more, so they will understand more from what the speaker will say afterwards or just has said. Very good form.
Yeah, great idea. And I mean, we know that it takes time for people to process things. Exactly. And my father was a college professor, and he always said you had to wait at least 10 seconds after saying, "Are there any questions?" Which feels like a really long time when you're standing.
I have a better trick, Brant.
Yeah.
I will say, "Are there any questions?" And I will just wait until there is a question. And it always comes. I mean, if nothing else, at the end, someone will think, well, this is so embarrassing, I better ask a question. I've not yet experienced that eventually there isn't a question that comes out, and then maybe the whole thing loosens up.
Yeah, good. At the end, always someone talks. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's a given.
It does make me wonder. We touched on this before, but when you talk about kind of clever tricks and hacks like that, are there ways when you get that kind of long-winded panelist, which I unfortunately tend to be, are there clever ways to kind of interrupt them and keep things moving?
You mean, Brent, that you interrupt them with respect for their view? Okay.
Exactly. And is there kind of a polite way to do that that doesn't really feel like
I just did.
I noticed.
There are. You can either ask if you understood the question right, like I just did. Make a short summary of what they just have said. Or if I hear you talking and I see Elling respond in a non-verbal way, by nodding or frowning or doing something, I could take your question to Elling.
Yeah, and I also, we've all experienced these situations where people talk for too long, and then my mind works desperately for an opportunity to say, hold on a moment, that's a very interesting point you just made there. Let's just stop with that a little bit, and then I've interrupted that person in the most polite way possible, I think.
Yeah, very good. So you give a compliment to the one who's talking.
Yeah.
I could also play or be unintelligent by saying, "Well, I lost you somewhere here."
What do you mean? Play unintelligent?
Yeah, exactly. I could admit that I'm unintelligent and say, "Well, I don't understand your answer anymore. I lost you somewhere. It must be me. But could you please rephrase it in one sentence? Or could you please give an example of what you mean?"
And that's, I think that goes to, and I'm sure you guys would agree, that's where it helps to have someone who is a professional moderator involved. Because if it is just someone from the company or someone from the association or, along those lines, or, Bob from accounting running the panel, they're much less likely to want to interrupt, and they will just tend to let someone go on and on and on and on and on.
Exactly. Bob from accounting could lose his job, and I just could lose my second assignment from this client.
Can you, let's take it out a little bit. We've been focusing a little bit on the panels because obviously that's a big part of what we wanted to talk about today. But can we expand on that and talk more about overall moderators? So, conference MCs, those kinds of things, and the roles that they can play in the design process, and what might be different in being more of a conference moderator as opposed to a panel moderator. Hans, let's start with you since you're the professional in the room.
Okay. Well, I think there are different types of moderators, and the ones you see very often are presenters. In the program, they get maybe 10 minutes to talk about the subject or the topic of the day, and then the rest of the day they will introduce all the speakers and do the time management, say when it's the break and when we all should be back again, etc. That's only process, and often that's someone from the field who has a lot of knowledge from the topic of the day. Could be a professor, could be a director, someone with status. Could also be someone from your sponsors. That's the presenter type. There's also the one that will give you more interaction, more fun. Could be an entertainer, could be a stand-up comedian, could be someone who's very witty, making jokes in between. And the third type is what we call the modern moderator, who is just an instrument in getting to the goal of the meeting. And that could be in the meeting design phase, just before the conference, could be in the designing of the different phases during the conference, so the different program formats. Could also be getting things on track when they get off the rails during your conference because there are angry people or something happens, or so you're the only one during the conference that is on stage with the reins in your hand to get things back on track again. but it has to do with the goal of the meeting. So if you need fun and entertainment, please take a stand-up comedian. If that's the goal of your meeting, it's fine.
Or I don't suppose, well, some meetings maybe fun and entertainment is the goal, but of course sometimes it's very useful to have a moderator who can put some energy into the room and you know, I don't know if telling a joke is necessarily the thing to do, but who has some wit and can get the audience laughing and smiling a bit, you know. But I have also seen where the comedian becomes the comedian on stage rather than the moderator. So there's a balance, of course. But I've also been in situations, but then more as a meeting designer than a moderator, where it's a given who's going to be the session chairperson, which is, you know, is typically a subject matter expert. It will be by pure chance that person has some knowledge or experience of good moderation. And then the question is, you know, if you have access to them, how can you brief them? You can't train them and turn it into something else. But there are little things like how the moderator introduces the speaker, and to say to the moderator, look at what information you have, or talk to that person you're going to introduce, and just keep one thing in mind. The only purpose of my introduction is to give authority to this person, to put the audience in a mindset of, I better pay attention because this person knows what he or she is talking about. And sometimes just that little guidance can change boring reading off CVs or rattling off experiences of speaker which aren't really relevant to what they're going to speak about today. That can help sometimes, but you can't turn them into good moderators just on the spur of the moment. Of course, you need to send them to Hans first.
But that's another one in the list of the great tidbits that you guys have thrown out today is to take advantage of that and use that as an opportunity to give gravitas to your speakers. And the number of times that I've seen that paragraph of information that just gets read, our next speaker has been to many conferences and events over the course, and it just goes on and on and on. So keeping it not only concise but also keeping that goal in mind is huge. I'm sorry, Hans, what were you going to say? I stole it. Sorry, I stomped on your thunder.
I lost it now, Brett.
Is it possible? Let me ask you this while you see if you can remember what you were going to say. Is it possible to over-prepare? Is it possible to do too much, to kind of get a little too into the nitty-gritty and get your fingers a little too deep into the pie, or any other metaphor you want to use?
Absolutely. If you're not an experienced moderator, you could be too tense to feel what's going on. And tension is your biggest enemy, I think. So if you are relaxed and self-confident, you'll do a much better job making all the mistakes that you can make than being too tense and too rigid in what you think should be done. If you read out all these texts of the speakers they use in their bios, it'll be boring. If you forget all about that and just remember the name of the speaker and you shout it out loud with a nice volume, then you get an applause automatically. If you say that our next speaker is Brent Kruger, who is very good at his job and very well known, and we're happy that he's here, you lose the applause. So you should turn that around. That's a little trick. Our next speaker is very good at his job, and we're very happy that he's here, and he is Brent Kruger. So end with your name, and then you can get an applause. Doing little things right helps a lot, and you don't have to be a very experienced moderator to take up the level of your moderation. If you just, I described just now the presenter and the entertainer and the moderator. To be a presenter is fairly easy if you just relax and know what's important. just do little things, little bits, and it will be better. Being an entertainer is a much more difficult task, because if you're not funny or you cannot play the guitar, don't try to make jokes or play a guitar. It'll end up in a disaster. And I think the same is for a moderator. If you are not very confident and comfortable with panels or with audience interaction, keep it simple. Every little bit helps, and if you take it on, if you take too much on, it might not work.
But I think you can never. I think you can over-prepare in the sense that you're trying to plan and script everything you're going to say. That is often the road to disaster.
Mm.
But I don't think it's almost not possible to over-prepare in terms of making sure you know the subject matter, you know the speakers, you know the panelists, you know the objectives of the meeting. And when you feel, well, I really understand what this is about, I know who these people are, I know what they're going to talk about, that is what gives you that vital feeling of being confident on stage. Mm-hmm. And also for moderation as well as speaking, if you can make absolutely sure that your first, takes only 30 seconds maybe, your first 1 minute, you've rehearsed it well, you're in control of what's going to happen when you're first on stage, and you can do that without thinking twice about it, and you get that initial feeling of this goes well, I'm confident, and then you go from strength to strength from there. But having the confidence to be able to think and talk at the same time, and to respond and react and analyze at the same time, and I think that's what probably separates really good moderators from mediocre moderators, to be able to be in the moment and to adjust to your plan if it needs adjusting, not to stick to something that isn't working and so forth. That's the real benefit of having a really professional moderator.
I agree. The more you can relax on stage, the more headspace you have to be flexible and to be creative on stage.
Well, we had a question come in from the audience, and I want to expand on it a little bit for you guys, and that is talking about when you are doing a good job and you're engaging with the audience and you're taking questions and things like that, and you get that either uncomfortable question, which we've seen a lot of times happens, or and this stems from what I've seen in my years of corporate events. It's that person's one moment in the sun out in the audience where they get to have a moment with the CEO or something like that. And so they ask this, 100-year question, or a very pointed question, or a very antagonistic question. How do you deal as a moderator? How do you deal with someone who's in the audience who maybe is either going off the rails a little bit, or has asked a question that is inappropriate or something along those lines?
Yeah. Well, in general, I would like to help that person in such a way that the rest of the audience isn't bothered by it. So if he or she wants to have some personal time with the CEO, I could rephrase the question. Is this your question? Well, perhaps this is not the question for this moment, but my dear CEO, would you like to have a cup of coffee with this person afterwards? Will you stay on for a drink while you can connect together and discuss this point? That could be an example. If it's someone that's very nasty, I would like to know where this anger or this uncertainty or this question comes from. So I would ask the person, why is this question, and why are you asking this question? I would like to know more, not to confront people with the question itself, but to help them maybe rephrase it so that they can get an answer.
Yeah, I think this is the clue, and this is when my brain really starts racing when this happens. And it maybe someone who asks a question which was clearly put and answered by the speaker 10 minutes ago, and this person was obviously checking his emails at the time. and then to pick up on what is not appropriate or relevant, and find something in there which you can build on to turn it into another question. To paraphrase it, or to go behind the question and help, as Hans is saying, help that questioner to feel that this wasn't something that I shouldn't have done.
Often, if someone asks a question in the audience, more people have that same question. And if, like Elling gives the example, someone just asks for something that the speaker just has explained 10 minutes ago, maybe he was on his phone or she was on her phone, but maybe it just wasn't clear enough. Or the brain of that person got so filled up that he or she needed more time to process and missed out a little piece. So I could go back to the speaker and say, well, you had just explained this and this, but there's still a question in the audience. Could you maybe give another example or two little examples? Or maybe you could give us some advice how we can put this into practice, or how we can see it from a different angle or something. So I would always help the person in the audience.
It kind of goes back to what we started with, which is the psychology, right? You know, being able to kind of use the reading of people and try and, you know, not put them down while still getting their question answered, and you know, in a way that doesn't, you know, point out the fact that they just repeated something that was asked a while ago or something along those lines. And of course, you're setting the scene. It only takes one person where everyone feels that, he just made a bit of a fool of himself, and you're not going to get so many more questions. You get that fear into the audience. And conversely, if they experience, you know, whatever question comes up, the moderator will build on that, turn that into something useful and intelligent. Then you help create this more relaxed atmosphere in the audience.
Yeah, more people will start asking questions then.
Yeah,
even the shy people.
Well,
Correct.
and it's just funny that we should land on this topic, because one just came in that was asking about how do you feel about the technology advances as far as Q&A and, you know, using things like Catchbox or Slido. How has that impacted the conversation, and you know, how is that? Well, just how in general, how has that impacted things? You know, is that a blessing or a curse to have more ways of getting up there as opposed to just walking up to a microphone?
Yeah, I must admit, on one occasion I was speaking at an event, and this was when these Twitter walls were new and modern, and they put these two screens up, sort of next to the stage, and the audience was encouraged to tweet whilst I spoke. And I said, sorry, there's just something I have to fix before I start. And I went and pulled the plug out of both those screens because I was there and I wanted them to pay attention to me and what I had to say. And I wanted to be able to engage with them in the ways that I needed to engage with them in the subject matter. And I had no need for an unnecessary distraction, both when they're writing their tweets and they're reading everybody else's tweets. And I felt at the time it would really be, if not detrimental, it certainly wouldn't help me as a speaker. Also, it's a very interesting question. I pondered over this a lot, and I've experimented a little bit. There are times when it can be a good idea to use Slido, which I absolutely love, or use some other tool, some other app. And instead of people getting up to ask questions, they type it in their phones, and they can score other people's questions, and you get the best question to the top, and then you can give those to the panel and so forth. Now, that's great. I love technology anyway. But then what I don't want to lose is the interaction between members of the audience when they're discussing questions and sharing experiences, and then the device can get in the way. So one solution which I feel works reasonably well is to give the audience time to discuss or prepare questions, for example, in little groups. And then after 10 minutes, I say, okay, now get your devices out and put what questions came out, in your discussions on the device and rate the others, and we get them up on the screen. So it's a combination, but it's challenging. It just suddenly gives us all these opportunities to design new and different and potentially more effective instructional designs. Sorry, Hans.
Before I just wanted to say I loved it when you mentioned it before. Just giving that couple of minutes before the Q&A session to sit and think about it and talk amongst each other. Like that's something I'm definitely going to start using in just my personal sessions.
Even before that, Brandt, if you have the audience and you don't need, I hate these big round tables, by the way. There are so many other ways of grouping people together. And maybe even better if you say, and maybe I have a slide that says quiet time. And I say, just take 2 minutes on your own now. Maybe use, a pen, a piece of paper, and write down, some ideas or some experiences you have had with what the speaker was just talking about. So even giving them like 2 minutes absolutely silent on their own, and then now share what you wrote down or share your thoughts with a little group of colleagues. And it does absolute magic to the number of questions you get. Sometimes you can say, we've got 10 groups in the room, and the task is for each group to have at least one question for the speaker. So now you're guaranteed you have 10 questions. That can backfire because you may not have time to answer more than 5 of them. So think about that as well. But it's a super way of actually getting the intelligent questions out. You never have this. Well, since there are no questions, I have one. I hate that. Sorry.
I'll share with you and with all our viewers our latest invention in an analog way. And after that, I'll answer your question about technology, Brandt. But what Elling says reminds me of what J.J. Indermauer, my business partner, and me did in our last interaction design course. We invented a balance between individual answers, group answers, and plenary answers. So we gave them a question, all the people in the audience, but before we gave them the opportunity to answer the question, we have them made little flowers of chairs. So you put 5 or 6 chairs together with the backs to each other. So you sit in a small circle facing outward. So you're in a group, in a kind of flower, but you're an individual because you don't see your fellow group members. So you answer your question on your card. You get 2 minutes for the answer. Then you turn your chair around and suddenly you're in a group. And it's the same flower, just with the petals to the other side. Then you start discussing all the answers to the question with your group. And you decide in your group what would be the best common denominator, or what would be the best question to the presenter or to the speaker, or what would be the best solution to the problem. And then you take it to a plenary level. So these little flowers, I did them last week in Parma, in Italy, and we call them fiori, which is a very nice word. And I think I start calling them fiori everywhere else in the world.
That's very nice. Also, I find it works very well. Sometimes I will actually say my preference would be to have just rows of chairs in the room initially, and then there's something happening on stage, a brief speaker introduction or something. I'll do some kind of icebreaker at first to make sure that all the chairs are filled from the front row, and so any empty chairs are at the back. I would tell the organizers to put the chairs in, so you have even numbers, so you have 8, 10, 12, 14 chairs in one row. And I say, put them in pairs, so you have 2 chairs and then leave a foot, and then 2 chairs and a foot. So you have something happening on stage in the opening, you want the audience to discuss, and you simply say, could row 1, 3, 5, and 7 now turn around, and you'll be facing two very interesting people, and the four of you will be a discussion group. And that I find is a useful trick to get from that sterile, stage-facing setting into discussions in no time at all. And it's another way of avoiding the bleeding big round tables that you have to shout across.
Good trick. I think, Brad, we could do a whole session of event icons about the setting of a room and the correlation with the interaction. There are so many possibilities there.
Well, so folks, let us know if that's something you wanted to see as an entire episode dedicated to room arrangements. Let us know, and we'll make that happen. I think that would be great. I think it'd be great because there's a lot of psychology that goes into that. How you set a room, how you change things in a room over the course of time. Hans, before we do have to start wrapping things up, but I do want to give you the opportunity to answer the question regarding the digital world and how that's impacted our Q&A and panels for positive or for worse.
Yeah, okay. I promised you that, so I will. And the two examples that you gave are wonderful instruments. I really love Slido because it really works well always, and I really love the Catchbox because it gives energy to a room. But even though I'm a fan of Slido and a fan of the Catchbox, I only use them if they are useful. I only use them if they add up to the goal of the meeting. And if not, it's just using technology because of the technology, because we can. And I don't think that's a good reason to use it. So first, I'll ask myself the question, do I need it? And if I need it, those are two perfect examples of different instruments that you can use. To give you a short example, even in small audiences, you can use Slido because you can use it anonymously. So even if it's a small group, if it's a very maybe emotional, difficult subject that you're talking about, giving answers in an anonymous way could really help getting to a solution. So use tech if you need it, but not for the tech itself.
100% agree. I couldn't have said it better myself. You guys are, as Will likes to say, dropping the knowledge bombs left and right. For me, the blessing and the curse is that you can get that anonymity, which sometimes means you're getting a great discussion that you wouldn't have had normally. Unfortunately, then sometimes you also get some questions that can be leading you down a nasty path, which we've talked about already on how to kind of deal with those and turn them around. So, good stuff, bad stuff. Well, as we start to wind down towards the end of the hour, again, if anybody has any last minute questions they want to throw in here for Hans or Elling, please do. We've already had a couple good ones. We always kind of, like I said, we bookend. So we start the show with the same questions and we end the show with the same questions for everyone. If you had to pick just one tip for event planners, the one thing that you want them to take away, either in regards to panels or moderation or just in general, because I know both of you are heavily involved in meeting design, what would be that one tip that you would have them take away? Elling, let's start with you.
Well, make sure you have really good and specific answers to the following question. What exactly is it we want participants to do after the meeting? Something they wouldn't have done otherwise, because you only get value out of the meeting if you change or entice some new behavior. If participants go away and they do nothing different from what they would otherwise have done, your meeting was by definition a waste of everybody's time. So it's the early objective setting before you start planning anything else. If you have answer to that question, everything falls into place. Then you follow up that saying, well, why are they not doing that already? So what attitudes do we need to change? What information are they missing? And your entire program and your instructional design follows from that key question. What exactly do we want these people to do differently after the meeting?
And that one bit of information is going to be key for whoever you have for your panel moderators or your conference moderators. Like, it goes back to what you started with, that's having an idea of what it's all about before you go in. So fantastic. That's great. Hans, how about you? What would be the one tip that you would have for planners?
I think there's only one important person in the room during a meeting, and that's the audience. It's not the speaker. It's not the organizer or the director. It's certainly not the moderator. It's the audience. And the audience has to experience something or to absorb knowledge and do something with it. But it never stops in that room. It always has an effect on the future or another place than in that room. And if you accept the fact that the audience is the most important person in the room, take someone from outside as a moderator to help you change that audience. Like Elling said, you want to achieve something with your meeting. If you take an outsider, you can, on the one hand, secure that you will get to the goal of your meeting, and on the other hand, the directors of your company and the important speakers will get more room and more flexibility, more space to do what they're good at and to receive the compliments that they earn. So the most important people in the room is the audience, and take someone from outside to make them happy.
Very good. Very good. All right. And then the final question that we ask everybody is, do you have any new resources, cool resources you want to share? Could be websites, blogs, books, gadgets. What's working for you in your life these days? Could be meditation, could be scuba masks, any or all of the above. What's one cool resource you'd like to share, Hans?
Well, it's not available in America yet, but we are working on our interaction design course, which is a bit smaller than the meeting design, because meeting design is the whole meeting, and interaction design is for those little moments in between speakers or just inventing new formats that will give you the interaction with the audience. And that could be something that we could bring across the ocean if there's enough interest in it.
Do you have a website set up for that yet, or?
Well, we have the workshop interaction design, but it's in Dutch.
Okay. All right.
I could translate it for you, but people could also find some information on our website, mastersinmoderation.com, or on the website from our training course, which is masteringmoderation.com.
Great, and we'll make sure to have those websites put into the show notes as well, so we'll get those. Elling, how about you? What resource would you like to share today?
Well, I don't have any new resources. I have the same boring old thing I've been doing for 12 years. 2 weeks ago, I had my 172nd ROI training course. It's something I recommend. London is not so far away, even if you're in the US these days. I do 4, maybe 5 training programs in London. They're like small master classes. There are the 2 days of intensive ROI training, how to set objectives, how to measure business results. And that's followed by a period of coaching for however long you need, whereby I like to make sure that you're able to and you actually do put theory into practice. That is generally the resource that I offer, and there is more information about that on the website. I think I gave you the website in advance, www.eventroi.org.
Very good, very good. And that was actually going to be my final question for each one of you, is the best way to find out more about what you do, what you're up to. Elling, I don't know if you're on Twitter at all, much?
I'm not a very active tweeter, but I'm on Facebook and on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I'm everywhere. But my it's something cultural. I think maybe it depends where you are. In some countries, in some parts of the world, Twitter is the thing. You've had great promotions of Twitter as a tool, of course, for the past year or two in America. But find me on any social media channel.
Absolutely. And definitely check out eventroi.org. Find out more about what Elling's main job is. That Event ROI class is the mainstay. It is absolutely the top-notch way to start ensuring that your meetings are making sense and are actually going to pay off in the long run and help you find that guiding principle of what your events are going to be. Hans, what can people find out more about you and what you're doing in the world?
Well, you could start at our website, www.mastersinmoderation.com, but we're also on Twitter, MI Moderation, or on Facebook. I think it's called Masters in Moderation as well on Facebook.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today on Event Icons. I really appreciate it. I love the conversation. I love talking with you guys. It's always a good, fun,
Likewise,
deep dive into the events and event design. So always enjoy it. Thank you to everyone out there who watched today. Thank you for your questions. I'm Brant Kruger of Event Technology Consulting. You can find me on all of the platforms as well, including Facebooks and Twitters and all that kind of stuff. Brant, BRANDTKRUEG. Thank you so much for joining us on Event Icons, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of #Event Icons. To catch the transcription and all of the resources mentioned, head to www.helloendless.com/blog. This week's episode will be posted and available by next Tuesday. Also, let us know what you thought about this week's episode. Share your biggest takeaway and join the social conversation. Sponsored by Little Bird Told Media. Just tag your post with #Event Icons. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again for joining us. We'll see you next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern, right here on #Event Icons.
All right, let me turn everything off now. Stop the recording.